I'm pretty sure it was during your S.A.S time, one of your commanders or higher ups basically said to treat, in terms of their competency and their ability and training and commitment and all, to treat the South Armagh IRA almost as if they were actual soldiers.
Well, that was a briefing from a senior IUC intelligence officer, and he said if we're operating in South Armagh, that we should treat them as professional soldiers, which we did. They were, they trained up to the standard, and we did treat when we done it. It was the most dangerous area of the province to work in South Armagh. Fun enough, it was the second IRA ceasefire led to the penetration of the South Armagh Brigade, but South Armagh Brigade became penetrated both by informants and by intelligence after that. But it was the most difficult area for us to operate in, a completely hostile environment with an enemy that was, and we did treat them as professional soldiers. However, the most active rural brigade wasn't the Tyrone Brigade. They were far more active and far more committed. Liner and was planning it before his untimely demise at Lochgall, was planning to break away the South Tyrone Brigade and start an independent unit shortly before he met his demise at the Lochgall ambush, when 8 members of the IRA were killed by the S.A.S. And I deal with this in the undercover war. There is, and if you chart this Tyrone Brigade, in fact, I'd have to turn this off, but it's a quote from, I've got the IRA guy's name on a quote somewhere. I'd have to turn this off and get it. But he says and confirms more or less what I say in the undercover war. It is clear to us. I think what happened with the IRA, they had several phases. They had the pre-military phase in the early 70s, where they thought that they could generally force us out by sheer military force. This is the provisional IRA. Then he developed the long war scenario, which basically drag us into a war that is unending and we'll eventually get tired. Then I think the IRA leadership, the Adams McGuinness faction in the leadership, realized probably by the late 1970s, early 1980s, that the war was unwinnable and there would have to be a solution. But the problem they faced, they forced everybody in Belfast out. Ivor Bell was forced out, a very militant chap was forced out, and threatened that if he joined any other terrorist organization, he'd be executed. They exposed them all out from, and I think the IRA leadership from late 1997 knew that the war was unwinnable. There'd have to be, the way forward was the political process. The big problem, now the South Armagh Brigade, while probably their most professional unit, was entirely loyal, would do everything that the IRA leadership told it to do, extremely. But the Tyrone Brigade wasn't so loyal. They were fanatics. And as I say, Liner was, again, it's a matter of historical record, was planning to break away. And the big fear for the leadership was, if they didn't get into a political process, that there would be a major split within the Republic, and based around the Tyrone and perhaps Fermanagh brigades and certain elements of Fermanagh, to form a rural IRA that would have its own political wing. Don't forget, Bobby Sands came from the Tyrone area. They had their own political wing, and would break away, and they couldn't sell a peace deal on the basis that another IRA was operating. They couldn't secure peace on anything. So the Tyrone Brigade had to be neutralized. The Tyrone Brigade suffered more losses than any other rural brigade of the IRA. And it was as a result of direct intelligence from a very high source inside the IRA was feeding us. The Lochgall ambush is the most classic example. That came from a high-level source who told us that operation was coming, and the S.A.S. were there waiting for them. And there was they were betrayed. The IRA, Tyrone Brigade, and certain other people were betrayed by their own people. So that when the peace process eventually started, the Tyrone Brigade was in no position to offer any resistance because it had been, to a large extent, neutralized, mostly by the activities of the IRA, of the S.A.S.
But I do want to ask you more about your soldiering. But before I forget, you mentioned the name Gerry Adams. There's a bit in Killing Zone where you were in, I think, a pub or some drinking place anyway.
It was a drink that. Now again, and this is a health warning, and this I don't know if this is true. I remember the MI5, who I knew very well, after a successful operation, told me when he's drunk, because Sir Gerry Adams be assassin, and I, being the ruthless soldier I was in those days, lamented the fact that he wasn't dead, and he said Gerry Adams was one of us. And as soon as he said it, he stopped. I tried to press him, and he never talked to me again about anything. Now, whether that was drunken bravado or not, I simply cannot say, and I'm not saying it's true. What I can say is true is this. Someone very high up in the Provisional IRA was betraying the Tyrone Brigade to us. That's true. And if you were to turn us off for 5 minutes, I can get you the quote from the IRA member, and he knows that as well. People in the Tyrone Brigade know that to this day. They know they were betrayed by their own people. He says almost exactly the word for word what I'm saying, that we were betrayed, and by the time of the peace process, we were in no position to offer any resistance to the political movement and thing. And it was to their ends. They knew there had to be a political solution. Wars don't end by talking to your friends, they come to talking to your enemies. They knew that they could gain more from a political process than they could from a military process. And it has proved true. Look at Sinn Féin now. They're in power in Northern Ireland. And if there's an election in the south, I have no doubt they're either going to win that or going to be a major power bloc in the south. Sinn Féin and Republicanism has gained more by the political process than they could have ever done if they'd have prolonged the ongoing troubles in Northern Ireland. The people who were running Sinn Féin and the Provisional IRA knew that. They knew the way to power and change was through a political process. But to do that, they had to get rid of certain militants within their own unit. And that's what happened. It's a sort of brutal part of life, especially the Tyrone Brigade. This may seem strange from an ex-member of the S.A.S. to say this, but I feel sympathy for them in some ways. These were people who obviously genuinely believed in fighting for a cause. I don't believe in the cause, and I don't believe in terror, but they were genuinely fighting for a cause, and they were being betrayed by the very people who are supposed to be leading them. And that's a terrible thing for people to come to a conclusion. There's no doubt in my mind that was true. They were betrayed, but for political purposes. And as I said, forgive me for repeating it, by the time the peace process started, Tyrone Brigade were in no position whatsoever to offer any resistance to the political movement because they had been neutralized by the S.A.S. If you look at them, any of the list of the dead, you see the number of dead as a result of IRA, of the S.A.S. ambushes, time after time after time again. It was, and it's a very sad. It is a hard truth for people in the IRA who are alive today to come to terms with. What if you? I'll send you that IRA quote directly if you want at the end of this podcast, and you can see the IRA guy says exactly the same as I. The leading member of the Tyrone Brigade says exactly the same as I do, and that must leave a great deal of bitterness in their minds.
You mentioned that that South Armagh was the toughest place to like do your job as a soldier. Obviously South Armagh was like a much more kind of committed area, and there was a higher percentage of IRA membership, and the locals and stuff were very much on side. And putting that aside, being a soldier, was it easier to do your job in an urban environment or rural, taking aside the fact that South Armagh was like kind of unique in its culture, just like the rural versus urban thing, going up against the guerrilla army, of course.
But again, you use the word guerrilla. I still use the word terrorist. We're not in agreement with that.
Guerrilla. I just mean like not a conventional army. They're not professional, not state funded and trained.
South Armagh was a very challenging area to work in. You couldn't go on the roads. Everything was done by foot. We on I think it was a third tour I did the South Armagh tour. We lost 4 soldiers in South Armagh. It was a very difficult place. So was Tyrone. The population in those areas were almost to a man and woman anti-British. You couldn't get served at any of the shops, for example, and so forth. I think if you're asking to go to your question, it was probably, we had the same thing in Catholic populations in Northern Ireland. But initially in the 70s, early 70s, up to about 77, we had a higher death toll in the urban areas, especially in London area, until we took down the no areas in London there. We were suffering far more casualties in urban areas and other things, but that's because we couldn't patrol the urban areas as a campaign. The short answer to your saying, overall, operating in the urban areas was far more challenging ultimately than it was in the rural areas. Was far more challenging than it was in the urban areas, in my opinion, anyway.